Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Sean Lowery Show, and this is part 2 of my decade recap. And this week, I'm going with the topic of the last decade of politics. And just like last week's episode about sports, this isn't something that I plan on talking about weekly, but recapping the decade, I'm having fun covering all these topics that I don't normally talk about. And I do have an overall message that kind of sews through all these topics, sports, politics, business, culture, that'll come together at the end. But when it comes to politics, I do think it's something that is important, and it obviously has an impact on the pulse of what's going on. And one thing that I'm not into is kind of the policies and the boring stuff. I'm not that interested in that. I'm not a nut obsessed with the day-to-day news, Fox News versus CNN, and I at least try to look at it from a higher level, not the day-to-day gridlock of Washington. And that's why I think I'm a pretty good person to talk about this. I'm informed, but I'm not obsessed with it on a daily basis. I'm somebody who thinks that the government is pretty damn good. It's basically as perfect as it could be. We have roads, we have great system, anyone can make it. It's not perfect, but ultimately I think our system is the best in world history, and I'm certainly not complaining about it. The other thing I like about politics is I think that elections are fun because elections are similar to marketing, but the product that politicians are selling that are running for office is they're trying to get votes. And that's different than getting money. That's different than selling a product. It's votes. So somebody trying to get elected, they need to be persuasive. They need to make people care, but they also need to understand the game of politics. So it's fun to watch it play out. I think it's a lot easier to judge history after time has passed, but I do want to go on record now, right as the decade is ending, and give my takeaways from how I think this decade of politics will be remembered. So the first thing that pops into my head, the first topic that rose to prominence this past decade, I think was the re-rise of this social justice thing. So it was kind of from 2012 to 2019, and I'll talk about the moment I think it ended. But so I don't know the exact terminology for social justice, but this is kind of how I see it. It's people who want to fight against the system because they don't think it's fair. They're people who, kind of get outraged and offended by what's going on in our current system, and they want to change things. And this is honestly kind of an effective strategy, and this is why it worked for a while. I think it rose to popularity in 2014, around 2016, 2017, it was an all-time high, and I think it's lower now. So that is the perspective that I'm coming from. But these people, it kind of works. It's an effective strategy to shame people. If someone calls you racist, you're like, wait, what? And then you're like, I'm not racist. So it kind of works. And I can see how they, kind of use this strategy. If someone says, hey, you're being unfair, the system you live on is unfair, you're like, all right, well, let's work on it. So you kind of get people to take a step back. So I think that's why they had success for a while. And I've tried so hard to understand why me and so many others were confused. And I think this is my opinion on why it's popular and why it rose this decade. So the social change in the 60s and the 70s with the March on Washington, with MLK and the Jim Crow laws that had to get changed, that was real. And there is a special feeling that comes with being part of this amazing social change. I would love to go out and fight for some injustice. I don't want to live in a country where every single person doesn't have a chance. The problem is our system is structurally, the laws are fair and the people are nice, and I don't really see it. So that can definitely be debated, but from an unbiased perspective, it's clearly losing politically in America and across the world. I see a fair country, and I think that I'm a good person that's in touch, and I think it's easier to be in touch this decade than any time before because of social media and YouTube and independent people, and you don't need to just listen to the news. But I think the social justice thing, it started around 2014 or 2015. There was something at the University of Missouri where they said there was something racist, and the students rose up and they got the president of the school to step down. At first he said he wouldn't step down, and then he did step down. And then that kind of energy spread to this Evergreen College, which I think is in the West Coast, Seattle maybe, somewhere around there. You might have to check me on that. But these students had a day where no white people were allowed on campus, and they tried to take over the campus with bats and stuff like that. And the guy, Eric Weinstein, one of the professors, or maybe Brett Weinstein, he went on Joe Rogan and talked about this and kind of informed everyone about it and how crazy it was. And then Caitlyn Jenner being named Woman of the Year. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you remember South Park making fun of this at the time, and a lot of people in their culture were just like, well, okay, she can do whatever she wants, but it's being forced down our throat as we have to look at her as a hero. Caitlyn Jenner's a hero for changing her body. And it was fun to see her towards the end of the decade just kind of making fun of herself on a roast. Everything seems to be more under control now. But then Colin Kaepernick was a big one too. And that was kind of the peak of the social justice. Colin Kaepernick kneeling, saying that the police weren't treating the citizens fairly, and he didn't want to stand for the national anthem because he's not proud of this country. So Obama was president during all of this. And I love Obama. I think he's a great president, but I don't think he really helped with this situation because, his whole background is like a community organizer. I think that the instincts there had him saying the right words, but he was kind of leaning towards these groups because he respected the style of organizing. And hey, so do I. The only political miscalculation by Obama there and all these people is that these protests are silly and they don't make sense because the system is fair. It's good. Our society is more fair than it's ever been in the opinion of many, many people. So Obama certainly didn't start this problem. His whole campaign the decade before in 2008 was about how race didn't matter and it doesn't matter that I'm black. Just vote for me because I'm the best guy for the job. And he was president for 6 to 7 years out of this decade. And it's been a great decade economically. And overall, it's been an amazing decade and he's part of it. And I think he was a great president, great heart, best intentions, just a good person. But then, of course, the rise of Trump in 2015, and that's when all these social justice people who were already kind of doing well went insane. And I think the average American had a little bit of fun watching the social justice people's brains explode with outrage and confusion. And the election of Trump was the very peak of this decade of social justice in these moments. And I think it started to die down after that, but not right away, of course. But I think one part of Trump's legacy will always be the end of social justice because the average person is so accepting and our country's laws are pretty fair and just, and it's just a losing political argument to say that our country is racist and an unfair system. It doesn't win. Trump kind of reminded us that it's okay to love America, which is a pretty damn good country. And I look at this and I think this will be remembered as a 6-year rise. And when I say it's come to an end, I mean, when was the last police shooting and the race war that the media struck up? Or when was the last person that was kneeling and getting attention for the national anthem? It's kind of gone away. So I think it ended in 2018, Cap's out of the NFL, Caitlyn Jenner making fun of herself. But there was one single event, I think, that ended this movement. And it was, I think, one of the most important moments of the decade by far. And this was the Jussie Smollett incident. So if you don't know about this, Jussie Smollett, he's a semi-famous actor. He's on a TV show, Empire. And he's kind of one of these social justice guys. And he faked a hate crime. He said that 2 white guys beat him up in the middle of Chicago late at night. And they were like, this is MAGA country. And he made a big deal out of it. And he said that they put a noose around his neck. Turns out that he paid his friends and he just made it up. It was a complete lie. And the city of Chicago was all upset because at first they were trying to find these 2 guys and they spent a lot of money and resources. And then once they found out he was lying, they were like, yo, man, you owe us money. This is a crime in itself to lie to the police. But the worst part of it all was when he went on Good Morning America with Robin Roberts, a great reporter. And he said, in the most actor-ish way, you think I'm lying? Why would I lie about this? And he was so dramatic and so acty, and he was lying right through his teeth, and that's been proven. And I think in that very moment, the whole social justice hoax broke open and everyone saw. And I think it was a moment where the country came together. People on both sides were putting this guy down, saying that's ridiculous that you would do that. And it just kind of broke it open. And I see this moment as the end of the social justice craze because everyone saw how crazy it was. This person wrote themselves a fake letter from racist people. They faked a beat up so they could get sympathy points because they wanted the people to think that the world is bad when it's really not, so they could be a victim. And it was just so dumb that it broke everyone's minds. And it kind of opened up my mind to these hoaxes. And I think that's another takeaway from this past decade, So the first thing was the social justice movement. And the second thing here are these hoaxes. So hear me out here. So I think the mindset behind the whole social justice thing that we just talked about is kind of a hoax overall. I think that what happened with this wave was everybody learned that our country isn't unfair and isn't racist. And that was the main thing that they said about Trump. He's racist, a bad person, and it didn't work. But the Jussie Smollett thing really opened my eyes because of just how blatant that hoax was. If that was a hoax, what about the whole Kavanaugh situation? I have no idea what the real story is, like anybody else. The Supreme Court justice person who had someone come forward right around his time he was getting accepted and said that in high school he, raped her or whatever, or just jumped on the bed or something weird, But so if it came out that lady, Christine Ford, made up that situation and it was a lie, I wouldn't be surprised. She was a Californian liberal from an all-women's college. And if she would have stopped that conservative Supreme Court justice, she would have been a hero in her community. So I don't know the real story. I'm not saying that she did lie. I'm just saying when Jussie Smollett happened, I was like, whoa, what else could possibly be a lie? And during that time, there was also the Russia thing with Donald Trump going on. And hey, I think that we should have a system that checks the president and make sure that everything's in check. But the Russia story with Donald Trump, it seems to fall in the hoax category. I tried so hard to understand it. It's such a vague thing. But when it comes down to it, Russia hacking the election or whatever, Americans are smarter than to be tricked by a few Facebook ads. And as far as, Trump trying to be a Russian spy or benefit Russia, he was born and raised in New York City. So I don't see how he would want to help Russia. I just don't get it. It made no sense at all. And one way to make sense of the social justice rise and the hoaxes was something I talked about in the last podcast. And it's the rise of the independent media and the YouTube and the podcast. Listening to Joe Rogan and listening to all the different YouTube channels, people on both sides talk about these things. And seeing all those things where people with a microphone, there's a bunch of different ones on both sides. But people with a microphone, they'll go to a rally or they'll go to a protest or they'll go to a campaign event and they'll interview all the people out front. There's so many of those. And I learned so much from those because you really do get people right in their raw form. And of course, this past decade, there was a huge media shift. And I think it affected politics more than anything else. First of all, because of this onslaught of information that people have access to, this caused the news networks to go crazy. Their business model requires clicks. And the way to do this is, clickbaity subjects, giant breaking news banners for minor events, and of course, outrage, outrage, outrage. The crazy people will watch Fox and only watch Fox and only believe one thing, and other people will only watch CNN and only see the other side. And that's when Joe Rogan, someone like that, brings it all together even-mindedly. My favorite people of the decade, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Scott Adams, all of these people, they've been called like right-wingers. But I'm done questioning myself. And I've done enough of that over the past decade. I'm not a crazy right-wing nutjob. I'm a standard, loving American who wants the best for myself. I'm kind of a centrist, and I want the best for everyone else too. And I believe in reasonable rules and laws and freedom. But as far as the media shift, it caused a big problem for the standard 3 channels, ABC, NBC, CBS News that we used to have. There's so much more information now that this podcast, my podcast, has to compete with CNN because you could be listening to that now, but you're listening to me. So it's just so many different sources. But I think the hero of the decade as far as this whole media shift is Joe Rogan. And he doesn't even talk about politics all the time. He just talks about what's interesting to him. His podcast, it has a guest. And he does it about 2 to 4 times a week, just for as long as it takes. It's usually about 2 to 3 hours per episode. But this is the opposite of network TV, the way CNN does it. You ever notice how the news kind of goes away when it's the weekend or holiday breaks? I guess the news just decides to stop working on the days there's no show scheduled on CNN. They have a show with a time slot and they're being judged by the ratings. So they need to force and spark controversy in a short period of time at a scheduled time. I think it's just a dumb way to communicate. And I'll admit, I probably got that idea from Joe Rogan. And I agree with him. This is not the best way for us to communicate ideas in our country. But yeah, I've literally stopped watching scheduled cable this decade, and I think a lot of Americans did the same thing. That's one of the big shifts this decade. And Trump definitely took advantage of this with social media. You know, although he also did make the regular cable news look pretty dumb a lot of the decade, he really made them show their true bias. I never knew it before, but they are biased and they are one-sided. And he showed those colors all decade long. So I think our country is doing amazing. And as this decade comes to an end, people often say our country is divided, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think that our country is divided. You know, obviously, if you get 300 million people together spanning 3,000 miles, not everybody's going to be on the exact same page. But nobody can do it better than America can right now at this moment. I think our country is doing amazing. So as far as the upcoming 2020 election, I think the way that we look at politicians will be forever changed by Donald Trump, at least for the next decade. This may be more of a Trump thing than a reflection of the times, but, you know, politicians, they have been historically known as kind of slimy and spineless deal makers who will say whatever they need to say to get the perks of being an elected official. And that's probably a true stereotype. Now, Trump will say what he needs to say, and he does have a politician in him, but he does bring this new non-politician element that I think will remain in style definitely over the next decade, maybe forever. And also, you know, he's older and he's made money and he's so self-centered, for sure, that at this point, he's just playing for his legacy. And honestly, that kind of works. You know, Obama didn't want to ruffle feathers in his Washington circles because he's younger and he wanted to make speeches and make money after the White House. He said that. And I see nothing wrong with that. But not Trump. And that's why I think that Bloomberg could be interesting. You know, he's just got to show some balls and some chutzpah. But I like Andrew Yang. He's not a politician. He's in the business field and he thinks differently. And I also think that Mark Cuban could be up in the next decade. And I think he has a chance to be even better than Trump. Although Trump will always be remembered in history, in the history books, when we look back on this decade, he will be remembered as the first of his kind, a non-politician. And I like the idea of going into the world first and making some money in business and then going for president. You know, it's kind of a little more honorable than grinding the gears of city council to mayor to senator and being in politics all these years where you owe people favors. I just think you're too likely to owe too much to other people, and you know you don't have the money to do it on your own, and having the money to do it on your own is badass. But if you don't have the money, you need to take money, then you owe people favors. So I think that forever, this decade, Trump changed politics by helping end the social justice thing that made no sense, and by giving us this new idea of what a politician can be, a non-politician. So to recap, social justice took a rise and a fall during this decade. Trump changed the way that we will look at politicians for at least the next decade. We're going to like non-politicians. We want that. And because of the rise of independent media, the people have more power than ever. And that has caused us to be able to see when there's hoaxes. We can't just easily be tricked. There's too many people chattering. There's too many behind the scenes people talking about this stuff. We're way too connected. And that makes the people more powerful. And I think that's the main story of the decade. The people have the power. And this has made a huge difference in politics. I'm so excited about the future. And I'll be here with you. The Sean Lowery Show. This has been part 2 of my decade series. Next week, I'm going to do the decade review of business and technology. So excited for that. I really appreciate you guys listening. And peace out. Done it!